leather jacket, a leather helmet to hide her hair, and adopting a deep voice, Eve learned how to glide and then began to teach the new pilots. In the last year of the war, she joined the Wrens as a signaller and was posted to the Black Isle in Scotland. After the war, Eve became an air hostess, at the time a most glamorous job. The qualifications were challenging. You had to be very pretty and married, aged between 23 and 27, speak Spanish, and be trained as a nurse. Undaunted that she couldn't speak Spanish and wasn't a nurse, Mum found herself on the training course to be a hostess with British South American Airways. BSAA operated two kinds of plane between London and South America: Lancasters, which carried 13 passengers, and Yorks, which carried 21. They had wonderful names, Starstream and Stardale, and the air hostesses were known as Stargirls. The cabins were not pressurized and the flights were marathons. 5 hours to Lisbon, 8 hours to Dakar, and then 14 hours across to Buenos Aires. After she'd been with BSAA for a year, it was taken over by BOAC, and Eve began working on Tudor aircraft. Star Tiger, the first plane to leave for Bermuda, exploded in mid-air. Her plane was next and arrived safely, but the plane after hers, Star Ariel, vanished without trace in the Bermuda Triangle. It was later discovered that the Tudor's fuselages were too weak to withstand the recently installed pressurization. By this time, Ted probably thought that if he didn't marry Eve, she'd be likely to disappear somewhere over the Atlantic. He proposed to her as they roared along on his motorbike, and she shouted yes at the top of her voice. They were married on the 14th of October, 1949, and I was conceived on their honeymoon in Mallorca. And anyway, that's what they tell me. My two sisters, Lindy and Vanessa, and me, grew up talking as friends to our parents, who always encouraged us to have our own opinions and rarely gave us advice unless we asked for it. At home, Mum had two obsessions. She always generated work for us, and she was always thinking of ways to make money. Mum worked in a shed in the garden making wooden tissue boxes and wastepaper bins which she sold to shops. Dad was inventive, and he designed special pressing vices which held the boxes together while they were being glued. Eventually, Mum began supplying Harrods, and it became a proper little cottage industry. Food was not as important at meals as company. The house was always full of people. In order to make ends meet, Mum invited German and French students over to learn English in a typical English household, and we had to entertain them. Mum always had us working in the garden, helping her prepare meals, and then clearing up afterwards. When I wanted to escape, I ran across the village green to see my best friend, Nick Powell, whose mother made amazing custard. We did everything together, climbing trees, riding bikes, shooting rabbits, and hiding under Lindy's bed to grab her ankle when she turned out the light. I can't remember a time when Nick and I weren't friends, but when we were 8 years old, I was sent away to board at Skatelift Preparatory School in Windsor Great Park. My first night at Skatelift, I lay awake listening to the snorings and snufflings of the other boys in the dormitory, feeling utterly lonely and frightened. At some point I knew I was going to be sick. The feeling came on so fast that I didn't have time to get out of bed and run to the bathroom. Instead, I vomited all over the bedclothes. Instead of being sympathetic, as my mother would have been, Matron scolded me and made me clear it up myself. I can still remember the humiliation I felt. And within a couple of days, an older boy in my dormitory got me into his bed to play feelies. On my first weekend home, I matter-of-factly told my parents what had happened under the sheets. My dad calmly said, "It's best not to do that sort of thing," and that was the first and last time such an incident happened. Boarding was a traditional way for a boy from my background to be educated, to cultivate independence and self-reliance. But I loathed being sent away, and have always vowed that I would never send my children to boarding school until they were of an age to make up their own minds about it. I was trouble, and always in trouble. Aged 8, I still couldn't read. In fact, I was dyslexic and short-sighted. Only after a couple of terms did anyone think to have my eyes tested. But even when I could see, the letters and numbers made no sense at all. But in those days, since nobody had ever heard of dyslexia, being unable to read, write, or spell just meant that you were either stupid or lazy. I was soon being beaten once or twice a week for doing poor classwork or confusing the date of the Battle of Hastings. My dyslexia was a problem throughout my school life. Now, although my spelling is still sometimes poor, I've managed to overcome the worst of my difficulties through training myself to concentrate. However, I was good at sports, and in English public schools, if you're good at sports, you're a hero. The older boys won't bully you, and the masters won't mind you failing all your exams. I became captain of the football, rugby and cricket teams, and every sports day I won a series of cups for sprinting and hurdling. Just before my 11th birthday in 1961, I won all the races and even decided to go in for the long jump. I'd never done a good long jump before, but this time I sprinted down the track, took off from the wooden plank and soared through the air. It was a new Skatecliff school record. That summer day I couldn't put a foot wrong. My parents and Lindy sat and clapped on the white marquee afterward as I went up to collect every cup. I won the Victilidorum. Who cared if I couldn't spell?